Welcome to Perspective and Potential, where we uncover new ways to see the world and tap into the incredible potential within each of us. I'm Abigail Straight, joined by my co-host and mother, Gwen Fund. Together, we'll explore ideas, stories, and strategies designed to help you grow, shift your perspective, and embrace a more complete version of yourself. If you'd like to learn more about us, you can check us out at perspectiveandpotential.com. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive in and see where a new perspective might take you. Today, we're going to talk about something that's tough for pretty much everyone: change. Even when we want to change something about ourselves, it can still feel so hard. We're such creatures of habit, and we talked about that last time. Our brains are really good at running on autopilot. So shifting anything, whether it's a mindset, a routine, or a reaction, can take real effort. I think we all have those moments where we realize something in our life just isn't working anymore. Maybe a habit that once served us well, but now feels limiting. But knowing that doesn't instantly flip a switch. For me, I am more of an analog person. I prefer to write things down. Technology, writing something down in my phone is not as second nature for me. And so making a shift and trying to use more technology in a very technology-driven world has proven to be difficult. I know for me, sometimes if I want to break a habit, but deep down I'm still just rationalizing it or justifying why now's not the right time. It's almost like we're protecting ourselves from the discomfort of trying and failing. But if we start to ask honest questions and then sit with the answers, even if they're uncomfortable, I think that that's when contemplation begins to shift into preparation.
Well, there really are a lot of stages to the process of change, whether it's a thought process, a behavior, a bad habit, or an addiction. Each of those things requires us to be deliberate and to be consistent. We've all been trained by our environment and, quite honestly, our personal preferences to think and act in a particular way. And when those ways are not giving us the results that we need or want, we wish we could be different sometimes. But habits and ingrained thought processes are really, really hard to overcome. So many years ago, two researchers, Carlo C. De Clemente and J.O. Prochaska, were working with alcoholics and observed how many of those people were successful in making life-saving changes in their addictive behavior. And what they discovered was a 6-stage model that kind of explains the process of change in any human behavior. Now, stage 1, they called pre-contemplation. Now, in this stage, people aren't even considering a change. They may be unhappy with the consequences of the troubling behavior that they have. But they can either exhibit rebelliousness, reluctance, resignation, or rationalization as an excuse not to change. They don't have time right now, right? These 4 mindsets preclude the person from even the first step of change. So it's been said that a person will accept an uncomfortable familiar rather than an unfamiliar better possibility. Because there is within most of us a fear of the unknown, and that fear can manifest itself in a whole lot of ways. And we'll go over those, like rebelliousness. It's kind of a bravado that the person exhibits to either deny or to combat the consequences of their behavior. It's kind of a power move to dismiss, ignore, or shift the consequences as being irrelevant. Reluctance. Now, reluctance is exhibited when the person recognizes the need for the change, but they're not sure they can do it or if it would even make any difference if they could change. Resignation. That's when the person just accepts the consequences associated with the behavior, probably because they're unmotivated to change. They may have tried before without success, or they may feel that the behavior, the addiction, whatever it is crucial for them, that they just can't let it go. Rationalization, which you talked about earlier, is really the tough one because people can invent a million excuses for why they don't need to adjust a particular thing in their life. In essence, they keep telling themselves rational lies. When you are using rationalization, you are telling yourself rational lies.
And, you used to tell us that growing up all the time. That is a saying that was, pretty, pretty common in our household growing up.
Well, because rationalization is, the common cold of this kind of a thing. It's everywhere and we all use it. So
Well, and the rationalize is an rational lies is an appropriate, play on that word because in essence, we're being dishonest with ourselves.
exactly. Yeah. Because if it was really important, we could make the time or we could do whatever it takes. Now we're going to get to stage two. So pre contemplation, we're not even really thinking about it. But stage two is when that person actually starts to contemplate what making the change might be like. Then they start to evaluate the risk versus the rewards of making the change and the pros and cons of whether or not to change.
I want to go back for just a second and talk about the way in which you or the four ways in which you said fear of change manifests. As you were talking about being rebellious, being reluctant, resignation, rationalizing. Um, just doing a self check there, which ones am I more prone to? And we've talked a lot about personality and how I think personality plays directly into those because if we can start to recognize these reactions to the fear of change within us, then we might be able to have change take place. So, I mean, do you think there's truth to that? That our personality has specific ways in which it reacts to resisting change?
Well, I think you could almost use the color code on this, rebelliousness, that's kind of a red thing, right? It's somebody who, has to be in charge, has to be right, kind of a thing. Reluctance, you could see that as maybe a blue personality because they're like, well, if I do this, it's gonna, cause troubles with somebody else, or I won't, you can just see them trying to accommodate. Resignation, kind of like a white thing to me because, well, that's just the way I am. Peace, change is hard. That's going to upset the apple cart, and I need peace in my life. Rationalization, definitely, I could see yellow,
Yeah.
oh, well, So I do think personality plays, and I'm not trying to pigeonhole those things, but I think you're exactly right that personality definitely can manifest itself in fear in one of those ways. So now we get to stage three. And finally, at stage three, we have the determination and the commitment to try to make this change. This usually includes coming up with a workable plan to facilitate the change. They assess past failures for new solutions, then continually sharpen their skills and their support system in order to be successful.
So, when I think about the determination stage, I'm reminded that it's not about being perfect, right? We've talked about that in a previous episode, but it is about being intentional and giving yourself everything that you need to be successful. So, sometimes I think there's this notion that motivation has to strike like lightning, like we just have to have that surge of energy, and we're just going to we're going to wait for that train to come through the station, and it might never come. Or it might come at a time when you're not actually in a place to do it. I feel like that often when it comes to like working out. I might make a goal to want to be and a change to be more physically active and healthy. And what do you know, when that iron strikes is when I'm at work and I can't go do it, right? So that doesn't work. You can't wait for motivation. So I think it's about creating the small, doable plans and then surrounding yourself with people who remind you that you're making the change in the first place and who can challenge and support you, finding that unique support system. Because if you involve somebody else, a coach, a friend, or even journaling, right? Just some measure of accountability. It really does solidify the commitment. And then we can go from dreaming about change, but actually planning and accomplishing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And, what's really interesting to me is that it takes 3 stages to finally get to any kind of action, to making any kind of a change in our life. And that just goes to show how much we rely on habit to function in our daily lives, but also how important that inner work is to this process of change. If you're not going through pre-contemplation, contemplation, and determination, then you haven't laid the foundation or the groundwork, for this change. And so I'd like to go over what I call the 5 R's of recovery. They These are steps in any change that we make in our life. The first step is, of course, that we have to recognize that we have a problem, right? That's kind of like pre-contemplation. Okay, yeah, there might be a problem here. So when we recognize that a behavior or a certain thing in our life is not working for us, that is key. And the second step is to have remorse, right? To 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 stop loving it. So I go, like, to my, journey with chocolate. Um, you know, I was such a chocoholic that, I didn't eat good things so that I could save the calories for the chocolate, kind of a thing. And when I finally recognized, that, "Oh, this is a problem," right? Um, I stopped eating chocolate for a year. And I thought, "Okay, I got this." And, then, I thought, "Okay, I can handle this now." And I started eating chocolate again. And within a month, after allowing myself to have chocolate again, I was right back to the old
Mhm.
habits again. And, I really, really, meditated and I actually prayed about this, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, why? I gave it up. Why don't I have control?" And it was the most wonderful inspiration. It said, "But you didn't stop loving it."
Hmm.
And for me, that was the remorse that I needed, that I was loving this substance more than I was loving my body, more than I was loving my life, so to speak, because, in the long run, I wasn't getting the nutrition that I should have had. So there
Well,
has to be sort of a remorse there where you realize that the habit is not worth what it's costing you.
yeah, well, and that's a total shift in perspective. I think if you had just lived in the control phase, right? Again, going back to then that can be actually defeating to your self-worth if you ever make a mistake, right? Because that's how you would view it. Well, I made a mistake. I partook of chocolate. Instead, if we truly can change our perspective that it's not that you are doing it for your body, right? Then you view chocolate completely differently.
I do, yeah, yeah, and I view myself completely differently too because, I realized that the problem was within me, right? That I had given control over to something else. I had this weakness and I was supporting it through, ingesting the chocolate and stuff like that. Now, I'm not saying chocolate is bad. I'm just saying that my obsession with it was really bad. The third step in this process of change is report. Now, this is where a lot of people have trouble. Being able to say to someone, I have a problem and I need your help. And this is what I'm going to do about it. Like in Alcoholics Anonymous, for instance, they have to get up and say their name and say, and I'm an alcoholic. Going to those meetings and meeting with other people who can be out front and honest with their addiction is so supportive. But just bringing someone else into this process of change that you're trying to make, whether it's a spouse or a friend or a counselor, whoever it is, being able to have someone who'll kind of hold you accountable. That is key to making any kind of a change, whether it's going on a diet or whether it's a full blown addiction of some kind. So that is the next step, that is crucial actually for us to continue on our journey of change. The fourth step is relapse. I mean, it's gonna happen, right? You're gonna get overstressed in some way, or you're gonna get triggered. Something's gonna happen that's gonna cause you to revert back to your old habit or behavior, and then, you're gonna have 1 or 2 choices, right? You can either learn from that mistake and figure out why you relapsed and try to shore up that weakness that caused it, or you can just quit and say, "This isn't gonna work." Um, but you need to expect relapse, and you need to view it with curiosity and with, a desire to find the roots of why you relapsed it so that you can shore those up. And then finally, we get to that resolve where we get to the point where we're not going back, no matter what we have to do. I worked with someone one time with addiction and a lot of trauma, and um, they complained to me that I know too much to go back now. And I thought, isn't that wonderful?
Mhm.
When you've learned and grown to the point where that resolve is so strong that you do whatever it takes to be the new person. So stage 4, finally we get to implementing the plan. Isn't that something? I mean, it takes so long to actually get there. And usually this stage lasts somewhere between 3 and 6 months. And a good plan usually replaces whatever that bad habit was with a better one, because our habits serve a purpose for us. And if we don't fill the void that's created by stopping the old habit, we're setting ourselves up for relapse. Like with addictions, there was this program that I was aware of where they traded the addictive habit for exercise. Every time the person felt like they wanted to use, they exercised. And that was so remarkable because the addictive substances were creating depression and all kinds of life issues for them. But the exercise was creating endorphins and helping their body to grow and to heal. So I think that's a perfect example of, what we're trying to say here is we take some self-defeating behavior and then we try to replace that with a self-growth behavior, something that will help us to feel better about ourselves and maybe be healthier to boot.
Yeah, and to not let ourselves get tripped up because we're expecting those instant results. Um, because progress, as you're talking about, um, it's not always dramatic. And sometimes we might even have a step back, right? When you talked about the 5 R's of recovery, there are some setbacks that will likely come up. And instead of spiraling, though, there's that roadmap for recalibration. And I think that's the key because change is not linear. There are
Mm-mm.
bumps, there's backtracks, breakthroughs, all wrapped up together. And then when we finally start really implementing the plan and we've shifted our perspective to see the way we view things, I think that the discomfort that change often brings, though, we start to see the value, or we start to see that we are making progress. I think that if we can start to find healthier habits that we can swap for the old ones, then we'll be on our path to success. Um, because just from, switching like a smoking, for example, all the commercials growing up, you would smoke, swap your cigarette for a stick of gum, right? And it might be a little bit messy, you might not be perfect at it, but you're retraining everything in your body, your muscle memory about, like, what are you going to? And I think nowadays, our phones can be that way. I know that if I have a habit of just mindlessly clicking a social media platform, and I've got 5 billion other things to do, and it becomes like kind of a time suck. I change the placement of where that social media is on my phone just by just doing a swap, and you put something more fulfilling in that same thing, and your muscle memory is going to click on it. So even if it's messy or imperfect, I think that simple swap is a really powerful strategy to help us on our path to change.
Absolutely. So now we get to the fifth stage, and that is the relapse and recycling, because change requires building a new pattern of behavior over time. And really, relapse behaviors are supposed to teach us where our pitfalls and weaknesses are. They're not really failures, but they're a learning experience. So we can get back up and get back on the plan and try again to move forward. Now, this stage can be ongoing as we face those times of stress and depression and feel the urge to revert back to our old habits. But it really isn't supposed to be a failure. It is really supposed to be the process that we're looking at.
If you are wired for perfectionism, then relapse can start to feel like the change didn't matter. But that's what we're trying to root out, is that the change is the process of learning, and learning might mean that there are some setbacks, or when you stumble, you're still learning something from the process of change.
Uh,
So when we approach relapse with curiosity instead of shame, it actually makes us stronger and we get back up quicker because we're not stuck in self-judgment.
that is exactly right, because that is the danger. That self judgment is killer. But then the last stage is called termination. Now, that really is the end goal of total change away from the unwanted behavior to the freedom of a better one. But like in AA, once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Even though it gets easier to stay with those new habits, high stress, we have to be aware that it can always send us right back to those old habits. So when we feel some high stress, that needs to be a key for us to seek support systems or something that we need in order to help us through. You can't I don't think we can ever get to the point where we feel like we're above and beyond. Um, you know, those old habits have been ingrained in us, and even though we're rewiring our brain and we're creating new neural pathways that are stronger and more easily um, accessed, that old road is still there.
Exactly, and I think that's why the termination stage is so powerful, but also kind of tricky because just because a habit feels like it's behind us doesn't mean that we might not ever be tempted again, right? I mean, I'm sure that even during high stress seasons, I know habits that I thought were over, right? They can try to sneak back in, and that can be a myriad of things. It can be substance. We might have even addictions to work and those high stress seasons, right? Some of those bad habits can get back in if you've preserved one day of the week that you're just not going to work, but then you find yourself letting it encroach on more and more of your personal time. It can be those are habits that are easy to slip back into, but I think that's why it's important to stay grounded. Again, whether with all of the things that we've talked about for change, checking in with a friend. You talked about prayer, so leaning into your faith, being honest with yourself, journaling. How am I doing? Right? If you've got nobody else to be honest with, you can definitely still write in a journal. And it's okay to just be honest there. But termination then isn't about being invincible, but about having enough tools to stay steady when life gets shaky. As we come to a close, let's pinpoint the most crucial points from our talk and consider how they apply to our daily lives. We talked about the 6 stages of change, starting with the pre-contemplation where we're not quite ready, all the way to determination where new habits finally stick. And somewhere in between, most of us will face relapse. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you're failing. It just means that you're still growing. So if you're in the middle of trying to make a change or even just thinking about it, give yourself some credit. Change is not a one and done decision. It's a process. It starts way before the action happens with awareness, contemplation, and a whole lot of internal wrestling. And then comes planning, trying, stumbling, learning, and trying again. So the biggest takeaway we hope you take is that change is possible. It's layered, it's personal, it's messy. So be patient with yourself and stay curious. The process is the progress. In our next episode, we're going to tackle a very common but dreaded process, and that's grief. If you'd like to learn more about this podcast, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Spotify. We'd love to hear from you. Your input helps us shape the conversation and makes perspective and potential even more impactful. We're Gwen and Abby, and you've been listening to Perspective and Potential. Until next time, keep exploring new perspectives and remember that every small change.
Bon appetit.